Most people think that change is hard because people are lazy or undisciplined or afraid. But that's not the real reason. Change is hard because once a path exists, everything gets built to keep you on it. And that's true for societies, for industry, and your own mind. There's an old story called the calf path. A calf wanders across a field and leaves a crooked trail, and other animals follow it. People follow it. Eventually, someone paves it, not because it was the best route, but because it was already there. Years later, it's a major road, and no one questions it, even if a straighter and safer route exists right next to it. Once a path is established, changing it feels wrong, even when it makes sense. And that's how systems get stuck. You can see this clearly in healthcare. We call it healthcare, but most of it functions as a sickness maintenance system. And it's easy to blame greed and profit as the reason things don't change, but that's not the whole story. Doctors are trained a certain way. Hospitals are structured a certain way. Insurance rewards specific behaviors. Even well-intentioned people are operating inside a path that was laid down decades ago. So even when better solutions exist, they feel disruptive, risky, and uncomfortable. And the system resists, not consciously, but structurally. Imagine 50, 100 years from now, we'll look back at this and say how barbaric we were, the way we treated people. But that's for another conversation. Now, here's the part that most people miss. The same thing is happening inside you. You may genuinely want to change your life. You may want to eat better, manage money better, respond differently to relationships, think and operate differently under stress. You know what better looks like. But within weeks, sometimes days of trying to make changes, you're right back in your old habits, old thinking, old reactions. And not because you're weak or dumb, it's because your brain runs on pathways and the habits that formed them. Think of your habits like roads. Old behaviors are freeways. They're wide, well-lit, automatic. New behaviors are more like dirt paths. No signs, no muscle memory. Under pressure, the brain doesn't choose what's best. It chooses what's familiar. And that's why stress and habits pull people backward into old patterns and not forward. And this is why willpower doesn't work long term. You're trying to force a new outcome while protecting the old path. Knowledge doesn't rewire identity. Effort doesn't override your conditioning. If knowing better were enough, most people would already be living much differently. The real question isn't, how do I try harder? It's, what path am I unconsciously protecting? Because until that path is disrupted, reinforced, or replaced, you will return to it, even if you don't want to. That's why someone will swear they'll stop reacting the same way in a relationship. They'll promise themselves they'll change their spending habits. They'll commit to health again and again, but then revert back to old eating patterns. Up to this point, everything we've talked about explains why change is difficult. But understanding the problem isn't enough. If awareness alone created change, most people would already be living differently. But here's what actually works. Principle 1, you don't delete old paths, you starve them. The first mistake people make is trying to eliminate old behavior. They suppress it, they fight it, they judge it, and that doesn't remove a path. It actually reinforces it. Old patterns will disappear only when they stop being used. And that means real change isn't about force, It's about redirection. Principle number 2, build a second pathway on purpose. Change begins when a new response exists. Maybe it's not even a perfect one. Maybe it's not even your permanent one. Just something different that starts to work. At first, you may still take the old path most of the time, and that's okay. It's part of your pattern. The win here is noticing it and taking the alternative path when you can, and becoming consciously aware of the choice. And that's how neural pathways actually shift. Principle number 3, train when nothing is at stake. Most people wait to change until the stakes are very high. They end up in the hospital or divorce court, or the sheriff is at the front door. And that's why it fails. You don't rewire new behavior under pressure. You practice the new pathway with small, low-risk decisions until it becomes routine. The brain learns through repetition in safety, not intensity. So let's say it's exercise. Giving yourself too much to do all at once is doomed to fail. So you start out small. Say, go for a 20-minute walk the same time every day. It will feel good, and it becomes easy to expand on it from there. Principle 4, change the system around the behavior. Paths don't exist in isolation. They're reinforced by routines, environments, and your expectations that you create in your subconscious. If everything around you keeps pointing toward the old path, you're going to keep taking it no matter how motivated you are to change. This is true personally, and it's true in a society. Systems don't change because people wake up. They change because the incentives shift. And your life works the same way. Principle 5, separate identity from behavior during regression. This principle determines whether the change that you seek actually sticks. When people try to change and slip back into old behavior, they usually make one critical mistake. They regress, and then they turn it into an identity statement. They don't say, I return to an old path. Instead, they say, this is just who I am. I can't change. I'll always do this. And what that does is it reinforces your interpretation of self, and it's what stops progress. Regression doesn't mean failure. It means your old pathway is still active, and that's all. The nervous system learns through repetition and feedback. It's literally how we're wired. When you regress to an old behavior, your system treats it as evidence, and then you defend it. Self-judgment doesn't create the change. It reinforces the very path that you're trying to leave. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me? Ask, when did this old path activate? What was happening right before it did? How early did I notice the shift? Those questions do something important. They move you away from judging yourself and toward understanding the order of events. What happened first? What triggered the reaction? When the old pattern actually took over. When you understand the sequence, you can then interrupt it earlier next time. That's how patterns lose their strength and new ones get built. Change fails when a setback becomes a judgment. Change succeeds when a setback becomes feedback and you actually use it. Once you understand this, making changes stops feeling like a character flaw and begins feeling like a process that you can work with. And that's when real control returns. Okay, let's get into the Q&A segment. First question. If change is about pathways, does that mean I'm not responsible for my behavior? No, of course not. Responsibility doesn't disappear, but the blame does. There's no place for blame in any of this. You need to cut that out of your thinking entirely if you want to be successful at this. You're responsible for recognizing the path that you're on, but most people blame themselves for repeating behavior instead of understanding the systems that actually produced it. Self-awareness is what we're looking for, not self-judgment. Question 2, why does stress always make me fall back into old habits? Well, because stress disables choice. Under pressure, your brain doesn't evaluate options very well. It just executes programs. So you go on automatic. That's not a personal flaw. That's how survival wiring works. If a new behavior hasn't been practiced enough under stress, it won't be available when stress shows up, and inevitably it will. Question 3, so is willpower useless in making changes? No, but it's limited. Willpower can help you start the change. It can put you onto the right path with the right mindset to get it rolling, but it can't sustain it. And that's the main reason people fail at this, because they're relying on sheer willpower. Lasting change happens when your environment, your identity, and your internal wiring all support the new behavior instead of fighting it. Okay, next question. Why do I keep going back to patterns that I know are bad for me? Because familiar feels safe, even when it's damaging you. The nervous system will always prioritize predictability over improvement. So it chooses the known pain over the unknown outcome. And that's why people stay in bad habits or bad jobs or even bad relationships much longer than they should. Okay, question 5. What's the first real step to change then? Well, first of all, stop trying to change everything at once. Identify one path that keeps reactivating, one reaction, one bad habit, or one loop. When you see that path clearly, you interrupt it early on, and that's how new roads eventually get built. Remember this. If you really want this to work, change isn't about motivation, and it isn't about trying to become someone new. It's about understanding your systems and how you operate both internally and externally that keep putting you back into familiar pathways. Once you see the path clearly, you'll stop fighting yourself. And when you stop fighting yourself, that's when real change can stick. If you want to go deeper than just understanding this as a concept, if you really want the tools to actually rebuild those pathways and create permanent change in your life, that's what we do inside Zygon. Things like the brain supercharger, the millionaire's mind, these rewire how you see yourself, and they build practical systems that help you interrupt old patterns and make change last personally and professionally. And that's how change stops being temporary and starts becoming real. I invite you to check it out and try it for yourself, and you'll see what I mean. I'll see you on the inside.